No, I didn't. I had no clue what you were talking about.
I'm trying to cover for you, but
all right. Well, I blew that for you. Let's talk about the Chiefs and the Carolina Panthers. What do you say about that game, Ned?
Well, what we say is we were all wrong in regards to the level of victory for the Chiefs. Everyone, I think, predicted the Chiefs to win, but heck, I thought it would be a rout. Carolina's not very strong. You've got Bryce Young at quarterback, and he's still a little shaky. Alabama All-America, but still learning the ropes and all that. And yet, what was he, 24 of some remarkable number against the Chiefs' backfield? And they stayed in the game. And Kansas City allowed them to stay in the game. Now, I don't mean that to be intentional. It's not. But the fact is that Kansas City really could not do anything to put this team away until you got the critical 33-yard run by Mahomes to set them up for a winning field goal, and that's really what decided it. A field goal by a guy who was already injured at the time, apparently, according to all the stories.
Yeah, we talked about this a little last week. It seems like Kansas City right now, if they need to make 11 critical plays to win the game, they're going to make exactly 11 critical plays to win the game. I also, Kansas City has shown they're going to keep games tight, but I expected them to pull away maybe later than they actually did. But props to Carolina. They put up a fight, and I think after a couple weeks of it, you have to start looking at and see have people started to see maybe a little bit of a blueprint to attack Spagnuolo's defense, because it's one thing if it happens against Buffalo because they've got Josh Allen, they've got weapons. You would expect they could have a good day against any defense if the stars align.
And a good point, because Denver sacked Mahomes 4 times. Then there was a bit of a layoff for the next game. Carolina sacked him 5 times.
And wow. They've had almost no pass. I think they had single-digit sacks going into that game. Carolina's been a team that's struggled with pass rush. They had a perennial pass rusher in Brian Burns that got traded to New York, all the good it's done the Giants, but they don't have much pass rush, and yet Mahomes was under duress. And we've talked about those tackles being a problem, and it helps you survive against Carolina. It didn't work against Buffalo, and I don't think I have to remind anybody what happened when the tackles were down in the Super Bowl against Tampa Bay. If that continues to be this level of a problem, it's going to bite them eventually. So can they overcome it? Sure, but they need to adjust how they're calling plays. They need to adjust how fast that ball is coming out. Mahomes has held the ball, and I think it's a product of he's been blessed throughout his whole career that, one, he's had the line to allow him to do it, and 2, he has the athleticism to cover it up if the line lets him down. But right now, some of those things are failing, and you're not going to be playing Carolina Panthers every single week come playoff times. You're going to be playing elite teams. And, all of this is to say Kansas City still scored 30 points. And that's going to win more. For Kansas City right now, that's going to win exponentially more games than it loses. But it was Carolina.
Hey, this is Ned Talk, your local live sports talk show. I'm Joe Westen, Ned Reynolds. The show's named after him for the obvious reasons. Alex Scott with us, the only member of the B team. The rest of them are all up in Kansas City to see the Chiefs and the Raiders today. We'll talk about that game coming up in just a few minutes, but let's stick with this idea that maybe the blueprint's been laid down.
It's an old adage, and you guys have heard it before. When you play with fire for a long time, eventually you're going to get burned. And the Chiefs, I don't put the Buffalo Bills game in that category because Buffalo's a very good football team and capable of winning and did win. But in terms of some of these others, like today's game with the Raiders, these teams are capable. They are professional athletes. We've talked about that before, and anything can happen. If Kansas City continues to play, I don't want to say it's a situation in which they don't give it all, because they do. But the fact is they haven't really been able to manifest a full-force football game in which they have blasted somebody. And why is that? I think, Alec, you just pointed it out. Eventually you knew that defensive coaches in the NFL were going to come up with some kind of a scheme, and I think they have, and I think they've done it by backing off a little bit from the blitz and then disguising their blitzes and fooling maybe the Chiefs' offensive line, because they really have had trouble keeping anybody out. And it's not with an instant rush. It's not with a jailbreak blitz of any sort. It's with calculated blitzes, hidden blitzes, and that may be the answer to what they're doing. Can Kansas City overcome this? Of course they can. They're a talented football team. But are they of the mindset to do that? They are 10-1, and you tend to get a little bit lackadaisical, not intentionally, but when you have a winning record like that. What has me bothered is my team, the green and white, they were 10-1 last year. And would they lose 7 straight? Is that what it was?
Maybe 1-6 down the stretch, and before they got bounced early in the playoffs. And I'm still remembering it was within the last 5 years. My Steelers started, I think it was 11-0, and then they stumbled down the stretch and fell apart. Now I think this Kansas City team's of a better caliber than that Steelers team, but that Philly one's one you point to. Where last year everyone thought this Philadelphia Eagles team is the best team in the league, and then something snapped with that defense, and the offense stopped scoring. The only thing you can point to with Kansas City right now is, last week they did put up a good amount of points. In Buffalo, they weren't anemic. They did put up a pretty good amount of points. Now it's just going to be a matter of can this defense rein it in, because that's what they've been leaning on. And back-to-back weeks, that defense has allowed more points than they're used to seeing. And one week it worked, one week it didn't. Maybe, and like you said, it's the offense can keep scoring, but eventually these pass rush problems are going to catch up. And, it's not a lot of blitzes. Mahomes has a good history against the blitz, but it's 4 down linemen, stunts, special types of rushes on the D-line. And if Mahomes keeps holding the ball for more than 2.5 to 3 seconds, there's going to be a problem.
Well, that's my question to you guys. The week when they lost to Buffalo, the drive that they went down to kind of put them down by 1 score, that was the best I've seen the Chiefs' offense look all season, and they just were methodical. It was short passes going all the way down the field, because the defense will give up that 5 and 6, 7 yard pass plays. Is it a matter of that the offensive line is not good, or is it a matter that Patrick Mahomes is holding the ball too long and not taking what he's given?
Well, in my opinion, one side of that offensive line does need work, and that's the left side. That's where all the pressure is coming from. But in terms of the level of athlete, that's difficult to say, because these guys are all seasoned pro, not all of them. They had a rookie in there at left tackle, and that really hurt them badly. He's not in there now. But you do have to have the casual pro football fan, Joe, thinks that the offensive line or any lineman, it's interchangeable. Put in one guy. No, it's not. You've got to have skilled individuals who know what the game plan is, and not everybody does. But the fact is that the Chiefs have had trouble getting some kind of inner working circumstance with that offensive line, and it really hasn't quite come together.
When you look at any team that is good for any period of time, there's been an investment made in that organization for the offensive line. You look at the Raiders of the 70s, perhaps the best offensive line on the left side ever. Mm-hmm. Art Shell, Gene Upsaw, Dave Dalby. You're talking about guys that are all Pro Bowls, and Dave Casper on that line too. You look at the Pittsburgh Steelers when they were good, that offensive line was monster. The Dallas Cowboys of the 80s, when they were good, offensive line was a monster. San Francisco 49ers, they didn't have a great offensive line, but they ran the West Coast offense to the T, which meant getting rid of the ball quickly, getting it out of there. Then you look at the New England Patriots, great offensive line. The Chiefs have done it with a makeshift offensive line. At times great, at times, So, I mean, it's just been... The one outlier there is really the 49ers, because there's nobody on that offensive line I think you can just point to and go, that was the guy. But most of the rest of those teams, you can go, yeah.
Even Kansas City, you look at when they lost the Super Bowl to Tampa Bay, it was because the tackle position suffered some injuries. But even those other ones, especially the center of the line since Creed Humphrey arrived, has been rock solid, and the tack with the guards is arguably as good as anyone's gotten in football.
The center of that line's the best.
Yeah, it's great. But, like you said, with these offensive line, it is not just plug and play. If you're watching, there is so much more mental aspect going on that line. It's not that those D linemen just line up and just charge the guy in front of them. They'll switch sides. They'll move around. These offensive line have to communicate. And if you've got a problem and you're consistently trying new guys, you keep disrupting that communication. One of the things you'll often hear an announcer bring up for a maligned team is they'll go, it's their starting line combination of the season, most in the league. And it's like, well, it's because that's a pretty easy thing to point to and say you've got a problem there. If you're continuously having to put in a new guy at different spots, move him around, be it injury or struggling to play the position at a high level, it's hard to build any kind of consistency. You look at Baltimore week 1 of this season. They put up a really good fight against Kansas City, but they had 3 new starting linemen, and it showed. They had a lot of problems against Kansas City on the line that week. Not saying the outcome would be different if they meet again in the playoffs, but those linemen have now had 12 games with each other. I bet they would not make some of those same critical errors. So Kansas City needs to try, and it's almost getting to the point this late in the year, it's like whoever you're going to stick out there, you need to let them just stay because they need to build some chemistry.
Got a little challenge here for anybody who might be listening who will be watching the game today and future football games. Now, the telecasts and, well, broadcasts for that matter, all tend to focus on the quarterback and the ball being handed off and who's running where and so forth and so on. Take your eye, just take a second or two and just concentrate on the line play while it's right there in front of you and see the stunts that Alec just talked about and how they operate and how an offensive or defensive tackle backs off all of a sudden and doesn't go and creates another circumstance for somebody else. It's very complicated, and it requires a high level of intellect to be able to master the various techniques that a lot of coaches have. It's really an interesting puzzle.
It's a difficult position to play because, first of all, you can't use your hands as much as a defensive player can. You have to keep everything within the shoulder pads. And that's a lot tougher than what it sounds. I played offensive line the 1 year that I played football, and it was not fun. It's a difficult position. It takes a special talent and athlete, and when you watch a really good offensive lineman stand a guy up, you got somebody good. And I wanted to say, last year you guys were talking about the Eagles. The Chiefs are taking steps to prevent that sort of thing happening with them this year because they made this little subtle move that we talked about last week. DJ Humphries, who was injured, not signed by anybody, he is back completely healthy. He is a Pro Bowl left tackle. It is his position. He's very good at it, and he is on their bench right now.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So if we have further trouble, if the Chiefs have further trouble today, I wouldn't be surprised to see DJ Humphries get in the game.
Oh, he was in last week. He was in for a short time last week and did play, so he's getting his feet wet in their system. But how much experience does he need? He already has a whole lot. And yes, that is part of it, but he is also injury prone. He's had that before, and then to have something else happen to him at this time of the year would be difficult. But that's all if, ands, and buts. You just don't know what's going to happen. But they being the Chiefs, a very astute job of taking a look at the free agent market because you can't trade. The trade deadline's long gone. No, you look for the free agents, guys who are still in relatively good condition, and can still play. And Kansas City's done an extraordinary job of that.
They let Lucas Niang go this week, which is a guy that we've watched for I think it's 6 years that we've been doing the show now, Ned.
Never has come to fruition. A guy who's a good player. He was a good player in college, but he just simply has not been able to master exactly what they wanted. And yeah, the time's come. You got to get the Turk on the Turk is the mythical guy who carries the big sword around. So you're cut. You're out of here.
Yeah. Well, on the other side of that too, the Chiefs had some players that are returning to the lineup this week. First of all, actually, they're both big names. Isaiah Pacheco is back, and he is in the number one slot because Kareem Hunt, a little banged up, but
toe injury.
What I read during the week was they plan on using those two guys in tandem, which I think is an outstanding idea because they're just different runners from each other.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that'll work well. And anytime you have somebody with the ability of Pacheco who has that fiery aspect about him, that's a good move. If he's able to overcome the injury, and he'll be sore, of course, but nonetheless, he's able to mentally overcome that factor, he'll be fine.
When we were talking about it last week about who was going to go, who was rotated out, the depth chart this week does not show Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I've not been able to find if anything's happened to him or if he's on the taxi squad or what's going on, but the depth chart, according to ESPN, is Isaiah Pacheco in the number one spot, Kareem Hunt 2, P. Ryan in the number 3 spot. I'm sorry, it's Samaje P. Ryan, and Carson Steele in the 4th slot. So interesting that that's played out that way.
Well, they have the option of electing not to dress somebody, and that's probably what's happened in Edwards-Helaire's case.
He would almost certainly, I think they'd have him be a healthy scratch at this point. Just, one of those things where it's a crowded room, and he's got to know this is his last hurrah with Kansas City. And I think it's going to be good that they can do a running back by committee approach for both Pacheco and Hunt, keeps them both a little fresher. It's a rare running back that actually gets better the more carries as the game goes on. It's only those select elite guys.
That's right.
And not to say that one of those two couldn't do that, but a lot of guys actually, okay, if you limit their carries to 10 to 15 each, and then you start seeing those carries late in the game when the defense is tired and they're just a little fresher, it behooves everybody and the offense as a whole. And Hunt's played too well to just say, okay, you did your job, thank you, see you later. So I think this is the right move to take a committee approach and ease Pacheco back in. It's one thing to have the injury be cleared for health. It's another thing to get back into game shape.
Interesting on the defensive side of the ball, Charles Omenihu comes back today, and that's a guy that he's had some injury problems since he's been with the Chiefs, but he can be a game changer for them.
Can be. Omenihu is still a solid player, but he's had the injury problems, and that's why I wonder if he'll be a starter. Now, he might see some time in there. He's getting over an ACL tear that occurred, I believe, in the Super Bowl, if I'm not mistaken, but certainly in the playoffs last year. And how well you recover from it. And Omenihu's not a kid. He's probably, early 30s, somewhere along those lines. And you don't recover quite as well. But we'll see. He certainly will not be a loss to have him in there because he does have a lot of strength and a lot of ability.
That's one strength of the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, they have many strengths, but you might say that defensive line is probably the best in football right now.
Has been. They've shown a lot of capabilities, and even though I found this stat to be very interesting about Chris Jones, he hasn't had a sack in the last 7 weeks.
Wow.
7 weeks. But he is a disruptor.
Oh, no, I agree with that. I think that sometimes people get too wrapped up in certain statistics, but you can bet that every team knows where he's at. Charles Jones, they know where Chris Jones is at all times. I mean, teams are planning around him. They're making special packages for him. They're doing special blocking assignments for him because he's a guy that can change the game with one big sack. And so they want to know where he's at all times.
And they also spend another player on him because often he is double-teamed.
Anytime you slide a double team his way and someone else gets a sack, that's not going to show up on Chris Jones' stat sheet, but he helped make that play.
Absolutely.
Well, that's why you're hearing more of the names like Derek Gnaddy and George Karlaftis this year because those are the guys that are getting to the quarterback right now. So much going on, and one thing that we do want to mention is the Chiefs did sign another kicker this week. It's Matthew Wright. Apparently, Spencer Schrader was injured when he played last week. He had some sort of injury when he was still on the taxi squad for the Jets. Is that correct?
It is a strain of the hamstring, and he's listed as being in the lineup today to do their kicking, so you have to assume that everything's going to be okay, but they did sign a backup kicker. Is it Matt Wright? Is that his name?
Matt Wright is the name of the kicker.
I am not familiar with him at all.
I'm starting to. The name sounds familiar enough. I'm almost wondering if he was who came in and kicked some when Butker had previous health issues.
Could have been.
So if a guy they're familiar with, it's this. Schrader did a great job last week. It's one of those where you'd probably feel more comfortable having Butker than not, but they like what they've seen out of these guys, and now it's on them to try and keep the game out of a game-winning field goal situation. If it's a replacement kicker, try and make his job as easy as you possibly can and kick in extra points.
He did. It says that I don't see who he played for, though. It said that he did play for somebody on October 10th. And I'm trying to see what team he was with at that time.
It's been funny this year. There's actually been a handful of kicker injuries, and there's been quite a bit of guys who get that. You get 1 week, our guy's resting his hamstring or whatever, and you come in, you boot a couple field goals, and they say, thank you. You're
out. They get a paycheck for it.
You get a paycheck, and they cut you, and they said, if our guy gets hurt, we know who to call. And it's not uncommon to see kickers make multiple appearances through different teams in a season because they're filling in where they're needed.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm not seeing – I mean, obviously he's been in the league for about 4 years now.
Yeah, but does it say what year? It may have been Duluth or somebody like that.
No. I mean, I'm showing statistics for him back all the way to 2020. And he has played this year. Looks like, did he kick for Pittsburgh?
No, Boswell's been, at least not this year. That might be why the name sounds familiar to me. He might have been who stepped in because Boswell's had an injury in the past, so maybe that's where the name's...
Okay, I think I understand this now. Pittsburgh 2020, 2021, he kicked for Jacksonville. 2022, 2 games with the Chiefs. Also kicking for Pittsburgh that year for 4 games. Carolina, 1 game in 2023, and San Francisco, 1 game this year.
So he could put out a card just like they did back in the old days that Alec is too young to remember. The TV show, Have Gun Will Travel, Have Foot Will Travel.
Yeah. That's funny. We watch that all the time. All right, when we come back, we'll talk about today's game against possibly, according to their coach, the worst team in the NFL, the Raiders. When we come back on 104.7 The Cave, it's Ned Talk.
You're listening to Ned Talk on 104.7 The Cave, a proud member of the Chiefs Radio Network. Back to Ned Talk on 104.7 The Cave, a proud member of the Chiefs Radio Network.
Lots of football on today if you like college football, if you like just football in general. Today is a great day for it. And, of course, we're here covering the Kansas City Chiefs, who are playing perhaps the worst team in the NFL, the Las Vegas Raiders. Had to stop and think there for a second. What city are they in now?
Could it be Oakland? Could it be Los Angeles?
Yeah,
where are they?
So I think it's been fairly well documented on this show that I grew up here in Springfield, Missouri as a Raiders fan. I don't know why. I think it was because they were always on Sunday afternoons. And I think that this was, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, back when Missouri had 2 teams, I think Springfield was more of a St. Louis Cardinals town, wasn't it?
Well, it's actually a difference in sports because certainly the Cardinals, the St. Louis baseball Cardinals, have superiority with a fan base over Kansas City. Excuse me. But how long that's going to continue, I don't know. Kansas City's pretty doggone good. But in football, it was, I think, an even split. The Chiefs had their fandom maybe a little bit more, Joe, than the Rams did, or the football Cardinals. Football Cardinals had a very good allegiance down here.
My dad was a big St. Louis Cardinals fan, so I grew up in the Jim Hart era, the cardiac cards, that period of time, and so they were my NFC team, and my AFC team was the Oakland Raiders. And at one time, they were the winningest franchise in the NFL history, and now they are pretty much a laughingstock.
Well, they also had top-name quarterbacks back then. Darryl LaMonica to start them out, All-American Notre Dame, and a guy who dominated. This is the mid to late 60s we're talking about. And then the Snake came in out of Alabama.
I was a big Snake fan, yeah.
And the Snake had, he had so many outstanding receivers to throw to. They were really, really a good team.
Cliff Branch, Fred Biletnikoff.
Yeah,
just two of the all-time great receivers. Mark Van Eeghem was their running back. They had that great offensive line. They were great defensively. But those days are long gone. They have since fallen on very, very hard times that never seem to go away. I guess at this point you have to say it's an organizational problem.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about it. It is an organizational problem. They don't seem to have the dedication that they did under Al Davis Sr. He made them what they were. Just win, baby. And he was able to translate that attitude into his team and his coaching staff and so forth, and he was very efficient about hiring good coaches. Good Lord, look who he had there. My gosh almighty, it was an all-star group. But now his son has taken over, and the son doesn't seem to portray that level of intellect that Al Davis's dad had as a father. So you have to think that maybe from the organizational standpoint that does fall into effect. But I think, and I'm just saying this guardedly, the Raiders may be on the verge of coming back. Aiden O'Connell's going to play for them today, and he has a lot of ability about him. If they can get the team together, and it may take years to do that, but if they can do that, then maybe reestablish themselves as the power they once were.
Are they a threat today at all?
Or they're always a threat.
Yeah,
because it is pro football. I can foresee them as a threat. The Chiefs are a 12.5-point pick, and if you're into playing point spreads and so forth, that is in danger.
Yeah, that's a mighty big spread there. If it's one of those things, like if Carolina can do it, then pretty much anybody could do it. And you look at these divisional matchups, they're always a little scary. No one knows you better than your neighbor. And the neighbors for the Chiefs are the Raiders, the Chargers, and the Broncos. So this is one of those games where there's a lot of familiarity, but there is still a very wide discrepancy in overall talent. The Raiders have some key pieces, and some they've traded away with Levante Adams. They've still got Max Crosby. We've talked about the offensive line a lot earlier today, and that's going to get tested because Max Crosby is one of the best at what he does in the league at generating pressure and getting after the quarterback, and he loves to get after Mahomes. So they're going to have their hands full. They're going to move him all over the place, try and confuse it and everything like that. So there's a chance. The Raiders have a chance. I think we can't count anybody out at this point. If Carolina can play them to a time expiring field goal for the win, then anybody could push this team if they show that same product.
Raiders are the third worst in the league, the entire league. They're the third worst on points given up. They're at 314 points given up on the season. They are tied for first in differential at minus 108. So that tells you, A, their defense isn't very good, and B, their offense is not very good.
Well, the offense has struggled because you've had Aiden O'Connell, who started the year for them. Excuse me. And O'Connell is a product of the birthplace of quarterbacks, Purdue University, and he was a good QB at Purdue. Their teams weren't, but he was very good. Then they have a kid named Bowers, who was their top draft choice, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago, from Georgia.
It was just this year. He's a rookie.
He is. That's right.
He's fresh coming out of Georgia, and he has been the bright spot. Brock Bowers has been great.
He is really good, and he and O'Connell teamed up, and they produced yardage. But then when O'Connell went out and Gardner Minshew came in, perhaps that little connection changed a little bit. So, yeah, their offense has been fragmented, I should say, because of circumstances involving personnel. But I like the O'Connell kid. He can play, and Bowers has certainly proven himself.
Well, kind of interesting that they have two really cornerstone pieces on either side of the ball. First of all, they have Max Crosby, who is, I would say, probably top 5 outside rushers in football. He's a huge, you talk about being a disruptor. He's a disruptor and a destroyer because he disrupts the offensive line and then he destroys the quarterback.
Yep.
And then I've read several articles that say that if you're going to start a offense, one of the pieces that they would go after would be Brock Bowers because he has been just absolutely as advertised in the NFL.
He's been the bright spot, and we talked about him some when we would cover college football last year because he was an absolute star for Georgia.
Oh, yeah.
And he looked like he was playing on a different level than even at Georgia University. He looked like he was a step above, and he has been everything the Raiders could have wanted, and they needed another offensive weapon. But they hoped to pair him with Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers and then put Bowers in the middle, but Devontae Adams is now in New York. The running back position has not been as strong. They let Josh Jacobs go this season. He's now a Packer.
He played Packers last night, yeah.
Well, there's going to have to be a shift in this running back conversation because you look at Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, and Saquon Barkley all leaving their prior teams, and all those three are doing are top 3 guys in rushing yards this season. Maybe these running backs are important, everybody. But the Raiders the quarterback play has been average to below average. The offensive line hasn't been excellent, and the defense is allowing a lot of points. They've got some good pieces, but they haven't been able to tie it all together or fill out the depth of the team. So this should be a game Kansas City can control. But last Christmas we watched the Raiders beat the Chiefs when they threw for less than 20 yards passing. So weirder things have happened in this matchup.
It was the turnover city that really cost Kansas City in that game. But I wonder about the psychology from Coach Antonio Pierce. I find this to be very interesting. We are the worst team in pro football. Their record is 2-9, admittedly. But what does that say to your team when the coach calls you the worst team in football? It certainly does not encourage them any. I just find that to be very curious. Maybe it's psychology in reverse. Maybe these guys will get out and want to prove me wrong, but unusual take.
That tells me behind the scenes he's seeing a lack of motivation, and whatever he normally tries has not been working. And this is Antonio Pierce, former player. He played linebacker. He's seemed well regarded amongst the players, as most players turned coaches tend to be. So he might just be grasping. He's like, my normal rah-rah speeches this isn't working, so maybe they need to kick a little bit. Maybe they need to show, like, what you're showing me is not good football, and we need to turn this around. So it's, you've seen it happen before. You've seen coaches call out their team, but it also seems like it's something you do if you're desperate. But 2-9 is pretty desperate times.
They've lost 7 in a row. They started out the season 2-2, and they have put a big 0 up in the win column since then. I think it's kind of interesting whenever we do this game, whenever we're talking about the Raiders, the word disarray seems to come up, and it seems like this organization almost seems to thrive on chaos. So, I mean, I don't even know thrive is the right word. It just seems like they function in chaos because they've had the coaching situation there has been so up and down. They had what's his name for a while, and the emails came out, and so he's out.
Gruden.
Gruden. They've tried to find people to replace him. Antonio Pierce, the team played hard for him to end the season last year, and he got the job. He took the interim off his name, became the full-time coach, and this year it seems like he's lost the room already. So that's just an organization that really needs to find its footing to be
Pierce says that he has not lost the club, and you can understand a coach saying that, but he says these guys are all together. They love each other. They want to get out and win. It just hasn't gotten done, so maybe I'm the reason for that. Well, that's, again, reverse psychology, and he's going to take, and as a coach should, and shoulder the blame himself. But the team, when you analyze them person for person, they do have some talent, but as Alec pointed out, it isn't great talent. However, it is pro football. These are guys getting a paycheck.
Does even any given Sunday apply to a Black Friday?
Any given Black Friday.
You can't make a comparison because this is the first Black Friday game ever.
All right. Well, remember, it's on Amazon this afternoon. It's Ned Talk. We'll be back in a few.
You're listening to Ned Talk on 104.7 The Cave, a proud member of the Chiefs Radio Network. Back to Ned Talk on 104.7 The Cave, a proud member of the Chiefs Radio Network.
About 18 minutes away from the start of the Chiefs pregame show, we got the inactives just handed down. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is out. Spencer Schrader, the kicker, is out. So we'll see Matthew Wright today. And the guy we were talking about possibly being the savior for the offensive line, DJ Humphries, he's out. So if you got any of those guys in your fantasy, might want to rethink that as quickly as you possibly can. Let's talk about college football for just a second. I think everybody kind of, except for our Alabama fan, called it last week. I think most of us sat here and said Alabama's going to be barely out of the playoff picture, and that's where they're at. They're at number 13. Play a big game tomorrow.
They do. It's the Iron Bowl game. They're playing at Bryant-Denny Stadium, where only a few neighbors and friends will show up, like about 105,000 of them. And that will be a dynamic contest. It always is. And Auburn is not incapable. Alabama is the Crimson Tide. But the fact of the matter remains they are 13th. And the bowl committee, which is subjective, it's human beings, it's not a computer, they're looking things over, and they're counting, in my opinion, on somebody to stumble in that first 12 that they have. And there are any number of possibilities. I'll tell you one that really kind of fascinates me a bit is Georgia Tech and Georgia, because Georgia Tech is not a bad team. They are playing in Athens. Georgia has a very good football team. Notre Dame and Southern Cal. Notre Dame is significantly better. They're number 5 in the standings at the moment. But Southern Cal, playing at home in Los Angeles at the Coliseum, they can be very troublesome, and they do have, while not a great team, and Lincoln Riley's probably on the hot seat there, they have a team that is capable. And Texas A&M, a rivalry that dates back to the turn of the century, the 20th century, like about 1904, somewhere around there. They played every year. Heated rivals. Haven't played in the last 13 years because of conference changes. Well, they'll play at College Station, and Kyle Field has a capacity of about 103,000, somewhere around there, on a post-Thanksgiving Saturday night. That place will be jammed. It'll be loud. The Longhorns will be the Longhorns had better be poised and ready for the Aggies who come out there. And Texas A&M has had an up-and-down year, probably not figuring into the top 12, but certainly Texas does. They're number 2. Supposedly they stumbled in there. We'll see. Anyway, somehow, some way, Alabama's going to get in there.
Oh, I agree with that. And I think with all the parity that you've seen in college football this year, you wouldn't be surprised at the end of the year if they were national champions.
Oh, they're a good team.
Yeah.
They're a very good team. They're an inconsistent team, but they can play.
It's like they absolutely could. It's going to be – got to love rivalry weekend, so it's just going to be fun. But you have to wonder when this committee is looking at these teams, how safe are some of these teams regardless? Like, are they – if Texas, who is sitting at number 3 behind Oregon and Ohio State, if Texas were to lose to A&M, do they drop from 3 to 13? Or do they say the body of work is strong enough? So then it's like, okay, so does that game matter? You look at Penn State, who might not even get a shot at the Big Ten championship game, but they're going to have to watch Ohio State and Oregon rematch. Then if Ohio State loses to Oregon twice, but that's their only 2 losses, they probably stay. If Oregon only loses to Ohio State, but they already beat them once, they probably stay. So there's only 12 spots, and to my head, at least 6 of them are already locked up.
They are.
There are teams that it does not matter what the outcome of their game is going to be. They're going to let them stay. And it's probably fair. If you think, you look at the 2 SEC teams in the top right now, are Georgia and Tennessee. If you think they're top 12 teams and they play each other tight, are they not still top 12 teams? So but that being said, you put Bama at 13, all you need is one little slip to happen, and they can put Alabama in there. And like we just said, Alabama, while the Oklahoma game was an anomaly, I still can't quite wrap my head around how they played so poorly. They beat Georgia earlier this year and looked absolutely electric. So Alabama is capable of winning it, and the committee has set them up to sneak in.
Dad, who's the best team in college football? Is it Oregon?
I would have to cast a vote for Oregon right now. You've got Dylan Gabriel at quarterback and an offense that is running so very well. You have a team that has been challenged. Ohio State got out there and they beat Ohio State 32-31, 1-point win. But nonetheless, it's a good conference. They played well. They fared very well. You've got to give them the nod as being the best team. But then again, what's the criteria for a best team? Because all these teams are capable of winning at any time. The same, the pro football, they say any given Sunday, any given Saturday in football, any of those top 25 teams can win.
Let me ask you guys this, because we do have the 3-loss Alabama team sitting at number 13, Ole Miss with 3 losses sitting at 14, South Carolina sitting with 3 losses at 16, and after that you have a plethora of teams with 2 losses.
Sure.
Is your opinion that any of these teams like UNLV, Tulane, Arizona State, Iowa State, BYU, should they be up higher than what they are?
No, because they lost games that they should not have lost.
But Alabama did too.
Well, lost to Vanderbilt. That's exactly right.
And Oklahoma.
And the OU game is the one that really has hurt them badly because they, as Alec pointed out, they were not competitive in that game. They did not show what Alabama teams can do. But they are. You have to figure into history here, Joe, because they are Alabama. The same with Notre Dame. They'll try every angle they can to make sure. Notre Dame's number 5. Suppose they lose to Southern Cal. Do they drop out of it? No, they do not, because they're the Irish. Now, can you put them on the road for the playoffs? Yes, you can do that. But the fact remains that you have to go back into the historic circumstances in college football and the crowd appeal. And I don't care what this committee says that everything's neutral. It's not. That all falls into it.
And some we've talked about before, it's often not about that you lose, it's when you lose. It's not that BYU only has 2 losses, it's that they're back-to-back and they're in the back-to-back weeks. They've happened too recently. That compounds your drop. If you had to drop after 1 loss, they have to drop even more after a second one. There was no room to climb, and now they're out of time to climb. And who does the committee want to see in their playoff, BYU or Alabama? They want to see Alabama in there if at all possible. And I have to, you look at the strength of schedule in some of these conferences. Alabama's losses are head scratchers, but their highs, their wins, their signature wins against the likes of Georgia and they beat South Carolina. Teams like that are those do count for something.
Oh, yes.
And they're going to have a hard time navigating this SEC schedule when there are 6 teams that are probably all in the top 25, but you can't put them all in the top 12.
Quickly, if Georgia is to lose, are they out of that top 12 because they're sitting at 9-2 right now?
Yes, they would be. They would have lost to Georgia Tech if that were the case. But Georgia's also going to play for the SEC championship, so they have another game after this. And that all is dependent on whom they play, number one, and what circumstances arrive, number two. Again, it's all a puzzle. And while the ratings came out this week, this was ratings number 4. Obviously, chronologically, the ones this week will be number 5. That's not the end of it. There is number 6, and that's the one that determines who plays.
When we come back, we'll give you our picks for today's game. Chiefs and the Raiders coming up.
You're listening to Ned Talk on 104.7 The Cave, a proud member of the Chiefs Radio Network. Back to Ned Talk on 104.7 The Cave, a proud member of the Chiefs Radio Network.
Ned complained while we were off the air. We have not talked a lot about baseball. The Hot Stove League heating up, teams meeting next weekend, and Blake Snell signed for a truckload of money, I think $132 million over 5 years. And Juan Soto talks heating up, so we'll get on the baseball, Ned. I promise. I promise we will. We'll talk about it. It's my favorite. I'd rather talk about that than anything else.
To be specific, the baseball winter meetings begin next Sunday, not this coming, but next Sunday.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So let's do our picks for today's game: the Chiefs and the Raiders in Kansas City. If you're wondering why some of our other compatriots are not here, they're up in Kansas City at the game today. I think the smart group's right here because it's probably pretty cold up there.
Yeah, but the sun's out, and it'll be very nice. Although later on this afternoon, when the sun goes down, it will not. It'll be on the cool side. But cool is relative because nothing is quite as cool as that game they played against the Miami Dolphins in the playoffs last year at 11 below zero. No, it's not that bad. In terms of point spreads, you have to be very hesitant about what Kansas City will do. They're 12.5-point picks. They are obviously a better team than the Las Vegas Raiders. The Chiefs were obviously a better team than the Carolina Panthers, who took them right to the wire last week. I'm not going to pick a point spread in this one as such. I do think the Chiefs win. I think they're the better team. Do they listen to the media? Have they understood the fact that when you play with fire, you're going to get burned somewhere along the line? They haven't been. Buffalo beat them because Buffalo's a better team, or was that day. Does it happen today? It could. It is possible, but I think the Chiefs beat the Raiders. And while I said I wasn't going to get a point spread, I think the Chiefs will probably score as much as they need to, so I'll say 32-18, Kansas City wins.
What about you, Alec?
I think it's going to be another Kansas City Chiefs game. They're going to keep it close. You're going to look at the records by the two teams at the bottom and see 10-1 versus 2-9 and go, why is this close? But the Raiders will keep it tight going down to the wire, but ultimately I do still think Kansas City's just, they're the better team. I think the better team wins today. I think they play well enough to win, but I'm going to go a little lower scoring. I'm going to say Kansas City wins 23-13.
Okay, reminder to everybody, this game is on Amazon if you're watching on television, but don't watch it on television.
Listen to it on the radio.
Listen to it on the radio. Let Mitch Holtis paint the picture for you, because I'm sure this is going to be a pretty exciting game, but I feel like that you're going to feel like the Chiefs are in control during this whole game, no matter what the score is. If they go down, I think a couple of years ago, they went down 14-0 to the Raiders, I think, at the first quarter, and then the rest of the game was all Chiefs. Mm-hmm. So I just don't think that there's anything to worry about in today's game. That's my gut, and I'm going with my gut today. And I think the Chiefs win this one fairly easy. I'm going to say 28-13. What do you know what the over-under is, or what is the spread?
It's 42, I believe. I think that's what it is.
So I'm going under. What do you think it is? What's the spread?
12.5.
Ooh,
that's a big spread.
I'm seeing 13 and
well,
a half.
it was 13 yesterday, and the money came in this morning, I guess, and knocked it down a little
Over-under
bit.
is at 42.
So
42, is that what it is?
I say that they cover the spread for today's game.
I say they don't cover the spread, and they hit the under.
Well, it should be interesting.
Take it to the bank, America.
Yeah, take it to the bank. You got it. It's our weekly lock right here on 104.7 The Cave. Thanks to Ned Reynolds. Thanks to Alex Scott. We'll be on the air. Let's see. We're going to be on the air Sunday, a week from Sunday, when we're covering the Chiefs and they play the Los Angeles Chargers. That should be a good game.
Is that a night game?
That is. Yeah, that's a night game.
Sunday night.
So we'll be on at 5 o'clock next Sunday, a week from Sunday. Enjoy the game today. Thanks to Brian Tyndall, Corbin Campbell, Mike the Intern, and Nick Fury. Chiefs and the Raiders right now, 104.7 The Cave.